6 months after the awakening, Elena stood in a room that had never existed before. The walls were made of crystal that seemed to grow from the floor, forming organic shapes that looked more like art than architecture. This was the new council chamber, built on a neutral space station where humans and council races were trying to learn how to work together. But today's meeting was not going well. The human proposals are impossible to implement, said Councillor Zarthek, the Nexari representative. You ask us to completely restructure galactic society. Elena looked across the table at the council members. They looked different now than they had 6 months ago. Less confident, more worried. The easy superiority they had shown for centuries was gone. We are not asking you to restructure anything, Elena said calmly. We are asking you to stop preventing other species from structuring their own societies. It is the same thing, replied Councillor Vethmar, the Zephyrian. For 1,000 years, the Council has maintained order in the galaxy. Without central control, there will be chaos. Marcus Rivera, who now served as humanities military coordinator, leaned forward. Councillor, with respect, your idea of order involved suppressing the development of every species you encountered. That is not order. That is death. Elena pulled up a holographic display that showed data from the past 6 months. Look at what has happened since humans were awakened. Crime rates have dropped on every human world. Production has increased. Scientific advancement has accelerated beyond anything in recorded history, and we have done it all without a central authority telling us what to do. But you are humans, said Councillor Grektor, the Korthak representative. Other species may not be capable of such self-organization. Sarah Kim, who now led Humanities Medical Research Division, stood up from her seat. Councillor, we have something to show you. Sarah activated another display. This one showed genetic data from multiple species. Over the past few months, we have been analyzing the genetic patterns of other species in council space. What we found is disturbing. The display showed comparison charts between current alien populations and genetic samples from historical archives. Every species under council control has been subjected to the same genetic suppression that was used on humans. The Deltans, the Orions, the Centaurians, all of them have had their natural creativity and independence systematically reduced. Elena watched the faces of the council members as they looked at the data. She saw something she had never seen before: shame. You did not just conquer these species, Elena continued. You lobotomized them, and then you convinced yourselves that they were naturally inferior. Councillor Zarthek's metal face showed no expression, but his voice was quieter than usual. The suppression treatments were necessary to prevent conflicts between species. Were they? Marcus asked. Or were they necessary to prevent species from becoming powerful enough to challenge council authority? Elena brought up another display. This one showed recent events from across the galaxy. 3 weeks ago, we began working with Dr. Tikar, a Deltan scientist whose genetic suppression we had reversed. Within 5 days, Dr. Tikar developed a new method of faster-than-light communication that is more efficient than anything the council has. She pointed to another section of the display. Last week, a group of awakened Orions solved a resource distribution problem that has plagued their home system for decades. They did it by developing a new form of government that balances individual freedom with collective responsibility. Elena looked directly at the council members. Every species you have suppressed has unique abilities and perspectives that could benefit the entire galaxy. But you were so afraid of losing control that you destroyed the very diversity that makes galactic civilization valuable. Councillor Vethmar's blue glow dimmed. What you describe sounds like chaos. Without guidance, these species will make mistakes. They will fight wars. They will destroy themselves. Maybe, Elena admitted. But they will also create things that none of us can imagine. They will solve problems that we did not even know existed, and they will do it by working together voluntarily, not because they are forced to obey. Elena stood up and walked to the window that looked out into space. She could see ships from dozens of different species docked at the station. Many of them were new designs created by awakened species working together. Counselors, I want to tell you a story, Elena said. 2 months ago, we discovered that the star system containing the Centaurian homeworld was becoming unstable. The star was showing signs that it might go supernova within the next 50 years. She turned back to face the room. Under the old council system, what would have happened? The council would have formed a committee. The committee would have studied the problem for years. Eventually, They would have decided to evacuate the Centaurians to a different world, probably as refugees dependent on council support. Elena smiled. But that is not what happened. Instead, awakened humans shared the problem with awakened Deltans, who shared it with awakened Orions, who shared it with awakened Centaurians. Within 3 weeks, they had developed a plan to stabilize the star using a combination of human gravitational technology, Deltan energy manipulation, Orion mathematical modeling, and Centaurian stellar engineering. She brought up video footage of the operation. Yesterday, they implemented their plan. The Centaurian star is now stable. An entire world was saved, not by council authority, but by free beings choosing to help each other. The room was quiet for a long moment. Finally, Counselor Grektor spoke. What you describe is impressive, but it is one example. How do we know this cooperation will continue? How do we know these species will not turn their new abilities against each other? Elena sat back down at the table. Counselor, we do not know. But we have learned something important about fear. She looked at each of the council members in turn. For 1,000 years, the council has been afraid that other species would become powerful enough to threaten you, so you made sure they could never reach their full potential. But your fear created exactly the situation you were trying to prevent. Elena brought up historical data showing the timeline of council expansion. Every species you encountered had the choice of submission or destruction. You never gave them the option of partnership. You created a galaxy where power meant oppression, where strength meant the ability to suppress others. She pointed to more recent data. But awakened humans have shown a different way. When we became powerful enough to destroy the council, we chose not to. When we could have taken revenge for centuries of oppression, we chose to offer cooperation instead. Elena stood up again. The species of this galaxy are not your enemies, counselors. They never were. They are your potential partners in building something greater than any of us could achieve alone. Counselor Zarthek was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What exactly are you proposing?" Elena smiled. "We are proposing that the council dissolve itself." The reaction was immediate and loud. All 3 counselors began speaking at once, their voices filled with shock and anger. Elena waited for the noise to die down. "We propose replacing the council with something new. A voluntary association of free species who choose to work together on common problems. No species would have authority over another. No central government would have the power to suppress development or enforce conformity. That is anarchy," Counselor Vethamar said. "No," Marcus replied. "That is freedom." Elena brought up one final display. This one showed a map of the galaxy with proposed territories for each species. This is what we envision. Each species controls their own worlds and makes their own decisions. But when problems arise that affect multiple species, we work together to solve them. She pointed to various symbols on the map. Joint research stations where different species can collaborate. Trade networks based on mutual benefit rather than exploitation. Defense agreements to protect against external threats. And a communication network that allows ideas to flow freely between all civilizations. Elena looked at the council members. "Counselors, your species have advanced technology and thousands of years of experience. We are not asking you to give up those advantages. We are asking you to use them to help build something better than an empire." The room was quiet again. Elena could see the council members looking at each other, having some kind of silent communication. Finally, Counselor Grektor spoke. "If we agree to this proposal, what guarantees do we have that our species will be safe? What prevents awakened humans from conquering the galaxy in 50 years? Elena smiled. "The same thing that prevented us from conquering it 6 months ago. We do not want to rule other species. We want to learn from them." She walked back to the window and looked out at the ships from different worlds. "Counselor, do you know what humans have discovered in the past 6 months? We have learned that diversity makes us stronger. Every time we work with a different species, we become more than we were before." Elena turned back to the room. "We could build an empire if we wanted to, but empires are tools for conquering enemies. We would rather build a community for working with friends." The 3 council members looked at each other for a long time. Elena could sense that they were struggling with concepts that were completely foreign to their way of thinking. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the human starship Defiance and watched the alien vessels approach. 3 massive ships moved through space like silver fish swimming through black water. Each one was twice the size of her ship and covered in smooth, metal that seemed to glow with its own light. "There. Beautiful," whispered Lieutenant Davis from the communication station. Sarah nodded but kept her face calm. Today was the most important day in human history. After 200 years of space travel, they were finally meeting the Galactic Confederation. The aliens had sent a message 3 months ago, asking to meet with Earth's representatives. Sarah's ship was chosen to represent all of humanity. The largest alien ship sent a small transport toward the Defiance. Sarah watched it dock with her ship through the viewing window. The transport looked like it was made of liquid metal that had been frozen into the shape of a teardrop. "Captain," said Sergeant Rodriguez from behind her, "the alien delegation is ready to board." Sarah turned to look at her weapons expert. Rodriguez was a big man with dark skin and careful eyes. He had fought in 3 wars before joining the space fleet. Today he wore his best uniform, but Sarah knew he still carried his sidearm and combat knife. Old habits never died for soldiers like Rodriguez. "Are our weapons secured for inspection?" Sarah asked. "Yes, Captain. Everything is clean and ready. Though I still think this is a mistake." Sarah understood his worry. The aliens had asked to see human military technology as part of the first contact process. It was standard procedure, they said. Every new species had to show their weapons so the Confederation could understand their capabilities. The airlock doors opened with a soft hiss. 3 aliens walked into the Defiance. Sarah had seen pictures from their first transmissions, but seeing them in person was different. The first alien was tall and thin, with blue-gray skin that looked like polished stone. He wore robes that seemed to shift color as he moved. This was Commander Velketh of the Veltar Empire. His species looked almost human except for their elongated heads and large dark eyes. The second alien was shorter but wider, with 6 arms and skin that looked like green metal. Science Admiral Talak of the Zephyrian Collective moved with mechanical precision. Small lights blinked along his arms and chest. The third alien looked like a floating jellyfish made of crystal. Ambassador Hithara of the Crystalline Unity spoke through telepathy that translated into their minds as words. "Welcome aboard the Defiance," Sarah said, stepping forward. "I am Captain Sarah Chen, representing Earth and humanity." Commander Velketh looked around the bridge with what might have been amusement. "Your ship is functional, Captain Chen. We are pleased to make formal contact with your species." Science Admiral Tilak's mechanical voice buzzed through a translator. "We have reviewed your technological capabilities through your transmissions. Impressive for a young species, though quite primitive by Confederation standards." Sarah felt her jaw tighten but kept her voice steady. "We're honored by your visit. Would you like to see our military capabilities now?" "Indeed," said Velketh. "Standard protocol requires assessment of new species military technology. This helps us determine your proper role within the Confederation." They walked through the ship toward the armory. Sarah noticed how the aliens examined everything with careful eyes. Talak ran small scanners over the walls and equipment. Hithara seemed to taste the air around the ship's systems. In the armory, Sergeant Rodriguez waited with the ship's weapons laid out on metal tables. Assault rifles, pistols, combat knives, grenades, and a shoulder-fired rocket launcher were displayed in neat rows. Velketh approached the first table and picked up one of the assault rifles. He turned it over in his long fingers, examining the metal and plastic construction. "Kinetic projectile weapons," he said, and his voice held clear amusement. "How traditional." Tilak's scanner buzzed over a pistol. "Chemical propellant system. Crude but effective at close range, I suppose." His tone suggested he was discussing stone tools. Science Admiral Tilak picked up a grenade and studied it. "Explosive devices using chemical reactions. Fascinating. We studied similar technology in our archaeological records." "These weapons have served us well," Rodriguez said, his voice tight. Velketh set down the rifle and smiled. It was not a warm expression. "I'm sure they have, Sergeant. But you must understand the Confederation moved beyond such archaic methods centuries ago." He gestured to his own weapon, a sleek device that looked like a crystal rod wrapped in silver wire. "Plasma rifle. It fires concentrated energy that can melt through any known armor. No need for primitive metal projectiles." Talak displayed his sidearm, a box-shaped device covered in blinking lights. "Molecular disruptor. It breaks the bonds between atoms in the target. Much more efficient than your explosive chemicals." Even Ambassador Hithara showed her weapon, a small crystal that glowed with inner light. "Quantum field manipulator. It can phase matter out of normal space-time. Your blade weapons are Quaint relics. Sarah watched Rodriguez's face turn red. She put a hand on his arm before he could speak. Our weapons may seem simple, Sarah said carefully, but they're reliable and effective. Of course, Velketh said, his tone like someone speaking to a child. There's nothing wrong with traditional methods. They have their place in galactic society. What place would that be? Sarah asked. Talak's lights blinked rapidly. Resource extraction primarily. Mining operations, agricultural development, basic manufacturing. Your species shows promise for such work. We had hoped for a more equal partnership, Sarah said. Velketh tilted his elongated head. Captain Chen, you must understand. The Confederation has very specific roles for its members. Advanced species handle military operations, scientific research, and governance. Newer species contribute in ways that match their capabilities. And our capabilities are limited, Talak said bluntly. Your weapons technology is approximately 800 years behind current Confederation standards. Your ships are slow and inefficient. Your military tactics are based on, what did our analysts call it? Brute force and luck. Ambassador Hithara's telepathic voice was gentler. There is no shame in this, Captain Chen. Every species begins somewhere. The Veltar once used similar weapons. The Zephyrians evolved from basic mechanical technology. You will grow under Confederation guidance. What kind of assignment did you have in mind? Sarah asked. Velketh pulled up a holographic display from his wrist device. It showed a planet covered in green forests and brown mountains. Kepler 442b, a resource-rich world on our border with unclaimed space. Perfect for a new mining operation. It's quite safe, Talak added. Far from any conflict zones, your traditional weapons should be more than adequate for any wildlife or minor threats. Sarah stared at the planet display. This was not the partnership Earth had hoped for. They were being assigned to dig rocks out of the ground while the aliens made the important decisions. We need time to consider this offer, she said. Of course, Velketh said, though I should mention, this is quite a generous assignment for a species at your technological level. Other new members typically spend decades proving themselves before receiving such responsibility. After the aliens left, Sarah stood in the armory with Rodriguez and her other officers. The weapons looked smaller somehow, less impressive than they had that morning. They think we're cavemen with guns, Rodriguez said bitterly. Maybe we are, said Lieutenant Davis. Sarah picked up one of the assault rifles. It was heavy and solid in her hands. The metal was scratched from use, the grip worn smooth by thousands of training exercises. It might not shoot plasma or disrupt molecules, but she knew it would fire when she pulled the trigger. Send a message to Earth, she told Davis. Tell them we're accepting the mining assignment. Captain? Rodriguez looked surprised. Sarah smiled grimly. Sometimes the best way to prove what you can do is to do it. Let's go dig some rocks, Sergeant, and let's make sure we dig them better than anyone expects. 3 weeks later, the Defiance left Earth orbit bound for Kepler 442b. In the cargo hold, along with mining equipment and supplies, were 10,000 rounds of ammunition and enough explosives to level a small city. Sarah had a feeling they might need them. The Devourer ships arrived like nightmares made real. Captain Sarah, Chen watched from the colony's command center as 3 massive bioships dropped out of hyperspace above Kepler 442b. Each vessel looked like a living thing, a twisted combination of insect and sea creature covered in pulsing organic armor. They were larger than Confederation battleships with surfaces that seemed to breathe and writhe in the planet's sunlight. Mother of God, whispered Dr. Elena Vasquez, staring at the main display. Those things are alive. The bioships hung in orbit for several minutes as if tasting the planet below. Then they began to move, spreading out to surround Kepler 442b. Small pods started dropping from their bellies like eggs falling from a diseased bird. Incoming transmission, reported Lieutenant Davis from the communication station. Put it through, Sarah ordered. The display filled with an image that made everyone in the command center step back. The creature on screen looked like a giant praying mantis made of black metal and exposed muscle. Its compound eyes reflected the light like broken mirrors. When it spoke, the words came through their translation systems as a low, hungry whisper. Soft meat on the small world. It hissed. We smell your fear. We taste your despair. You will feed us well. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the human colony, Sarah replied, forcing her voice to stay steady. Withdraw from this system immediately. The creature's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. Small meat gives orders? Amusing. We are the devourers. We consume all. Your resistance will make the feast sweeter. The transmission ended. On the tactical display, hundreds of drop pods were falling toward the planet's surface like burning meteors. Confederation defense platforms are engaging, Davis reported. Sarah watched as the planet's automated defense systems came online. Plasma cannons and missile launchers that the Confederation had installed began firing at the incoming pods. Bright flashes lit up the upper atmosphere as energy beams struck their targets. For a moment, Sarah felt hope. The defense platforms were destroying dozens of pods, but then she noticed something wrong. The hit ratio is dropping, observed Lieutenant Commander Tanaka, studying the tactical data. She was right. The first wave of plasma fire had been devastatingly effective, destroying nearly every pod it hit. But now the energy beams were passing through the creatures without effect. The drop pods that had looked vulnerable minutes ago were now shrugging off direct hits. They're adapting, Sarah said with growing understanding, in real time. Science Admiral Telock, who had remained in the command center against Commander Velketh's orders, stared at the display in horror. Impossible. Biological adaptation takes generations, not minutes. Not for devourers, Sarah said grimly. That's why they're so dangerous. The first drop pods hit the ground in the forest surrounding the human colony. Each pod split open like a flower, releasing creatures that defied easy description. Some looked like giant spiders with too many legs. Others resembled walking trees with mouths full of metal teeth. All of them moved with predatory purpose toward the colony. Defense perimeter is reporting contact. Rodriguez's voice crackled through the radio. The sergeant had positioned himself with a squad of volunteers at the colony's outer edge. Lots of them. Moving fast through the trees, Sarah activated the colony-wide communication system. All personnel, this is Captain Chen, combat stations. Weapons free. Show these things what humans are made of. The first exchange of fire came from the eastern perimeter. Sarah heard the distinctive crack of human assault rifles followed by inhuman screaming. Through the security cameras, she watched tracer rounds streak into the forest. Rodriguez, report, she called into her radio. First contact successful, Rodriguez replied, his voice calm despite the gunfire in the background. Kinetic rounds are effective. Repeat, kinetic rounds are working. On the tactical display, Sarah saw red dots representing devourer creatures beginning to slow and stop. Unlike the energy weapons that had quickly become useless, the human bullets were still killing the enemy. How is that possible? Tlaloc demanded, his mechanical voice rising in pitch. Elena Vasquez was already pulling up data on her tablet. Because you can't adapt to physics, she said with growing excitement. Energy weapons can be absorbed, deflected, or dispersed. But a chunk of metal traveling at 2,000 feet per second, that's just momentum and mass. No amount of biological adaptation changes the laws of physics. The battle spread around the colony's perimeter. Human defenders took positions behind mining equipment and prefabricated barriers, firing controlled bursts at the approaching creatures. The old-fashioned muzzle flashes looked primitive compared to the sleek energy weapons the Confederation used. But they were turning devourer attackers into corpses. Northern perimeter needs support, called Tanaka through the radio. She was leading a squad of colonists armed with hunting rifles and mining explosives, big ones coming through the ravine. Sarah switched the main display to the northern camera. Through the trees, she could see creatures the size of small buildings pushing toward the colony. They looked like giant beetles with armor plating that gleamed like oil. Elena, can your explosives stop those? Sarah asked. The demolitions expert studied the approaching monsters. Chemical explosives should work the same as kinetic rounds. They can't adapt to shrapnel moving at supersonic speeds. Elena grabbed her equipment bag and headed for the door. I'm going to the northern perimeter. Time to show these bugs what dynamite can do. As Elena left, alarms began blaring throughout the colony. The display showed new contacts dropping from orbit. Larger creatures that rode the drop pods down like living meteors. These new arrivals were different from the first wave. They moved like liquid metal and seemed to phase in and out of solid matter. Second wave incoming, Davis reported. These readings are different. Higher energy signatures. The new creatures hit the ground running and immediately charged the human defenses. But something strange happened when the first one reached Rodriguez's position. Sarah watched through the security camera as the creature ran straight through a concrete barrier, as if it wasn't there. then suddenly became solid again when Rodriguez's rifle bullets hit it. The creature fell, twitching and dying. "Sergeant, how did you know when to fire?" Sarah asked through the radio. "Simple, Captain," Rodriguez replied while reloading his weapon. "Ghosts can't hurt you if they're not solid. If they want to kill us, they have to be solid. And if they're solid, they can die." The battle raged for hours. Human defenders moved from position to position, using terrain and cover the way soldiers had for thousands of years. When ammunition ran low, they switched to combat knives and improvised weapons. When explosives were needed, Elena's people rigged mining charges that turned devourer attackers into scattered pieces. The most surprising moment came when a group of flying creatures attacked the command center directly. They looked like bats made of living shadow, diving down from the sky with claws extended. The Confederation's anti-aircraft systems couldn't lock onto them. The creatures seemed to exist, partially outside normal space. Lieutenant Commander Tanaka met them on the command center's roof with nothing but a katana. Sarah watched through the security cameras as the martial arts instructor moved like a dancer, her blade cutting through creatures that energy weapons couldn't touch. The ancient steel parted shadow flesh as easily as air, dropping the flying attackers one by one. "How is she doing that?" Tilak demanded, his mechanical body shaking with confusion. "Same principle," Sarah said, beginning to understand. "Steel doesn't care if something is partially phased or energy-based. Metal cuts whatever it touches." As dawn approached, the attacks began to weaken. The devourer forces were pulling back into the forests, leaving hundreds of their dead around the colony's perimeter. Human casualties were surprisingly light. A few wounded, none killed, but Sarah knew this was just the beginning. "Captain," Davis called from the communications station, "I'm picking up movement from the bioships in orbit. They're launching something big." The main display showed a new contact separating from the largest bioship. This one was different from the drop pods, larger, more complex, and radiating massive amounts of energy. "What is that?" Sarah asked. T-Lock's scanners were working frantically. "Unknown configuration. Energy readings are impossible. It's generating power equivalent to a small star." Elena's voice came through the radio from her position at the northern perimeter. "Captain, whatever that thing is, it's heading straight for us. And it's big enough to glass this entire continent." Sarah stared at the display, watching the massive object descend toward their planet. Her people had proven that human weapons could kill devourers, but this was something different, something that might be beyond anything they could fight. "All stations prepare for," she began, then stopped. She was looking at the tactical display showing their mining operation. Tons of refined metals, carefully extracted and processed over 6 months of hard work, and next to the refining station sat the Prospector, their heavy mining ship, loaded with enough nuclear charges to crack open mountains. Sarah smiled grimly as an idea formed in her mind. "Rodriguez, Tanaka, Elena," she called into the radio. "Emergency meeting in the command center. We need to discuss our options." The command center felt like the eye of a storm. Outside, devourer creatures prowled through the forests, testing the colony's defenses. Above, the massive alien weapon ship descended slowly toward the planet, growing larger with each passing hour. Captain Sarah Chen stood before a holographic display showing the mining ship Prospector. Around her, her senior staff studied the tactical situation with grim faces. "The devourer weapon will be in firing position in 6 hours," reported Lieutenant Davis. "At current descent rate, it'll stop just outside our atmosphere." "What kind of firepower are we looking at?" asked Sergeant Rodriguez. Science Admiral T-Lock's mechanical body trembled as he spoke. "Energy readings suggest it can sterilize the planet's surface. Everything within 1,000 kilometers will be vaporized." Dr. Elena Vasquez looked up from her calculations. "The Prospector is loaded with enough mining charges to level a mountain range. Nuclear-shaped charges designed for deep excavation. Can we get those charges to the weapon ship?" Sarah asked. Elena nodded slowly. "The Prospector has enough fuel for 1 orbital flight. But Captain, that's a suicide mission. Whoever pilots that ship won't be coming back." "I'll do it," said Lieutenant Commander Tanaka without hesitation. "No," Rodriguez interrupted. "I'm the best pilot here. It should be me." Sarah looked at her officers. These people had followed her to a remote planet, built a colony from nothing, and now faced extinction with courage. She felt proud and heartbroken at the same time. "We'll decide who pilots the mission later," she said. First, let's make sure it can work. Elena, can you modify the charges for maximum effect? Nuclear explosives should work against anything, Elena said. The Devourers can adapt to energy weapons, but they can't adapt to having their atoms split apart. A new alarm sounded. The tactical display showed movement throughout the forests around the colony. Red dots representing Devourer forces were massing for another attack. They're regrouping, observed Tanaka. Bigger force this time, Sarah studied the display. Unlike the first chaotic assault, this attack was organized. The creatures were moving in coordinated groups using the terrain to approach from multiple directions. They learned fast, Rodriguez muttered. Too fast, Talak said with growing fear. Each wave is more organized than the last. They're adapting their tactics in real time. Sarah activated the colony-wide communication system. All personnel prepare for second wave assault. Conserve ammunition, make every shot count. The attack began at sunset. This time, the Devourers didn't charge blindly into human guns. They used cover, moved in coordinated rushes, and employed tactics that would have impressed any military commander. But humans had been perfecting warfare for millennia. Rodriguez's voice crackled through the radio from the eastern perimeter. Contact. Multiple targets using the mining trenches for cover, switching to explosives. Sarah watched through security cameras as Rodriguez's team dropped grenades into the trenches. The explosions sent Devourer creatures flying in pieces, but more kept coming. At the northern barrier, Tanaka was demonstrating why humans had never abandoned close-quarters combat. When a group of spider-like creatures broke through the defensive line, she met them with katana and combat knife. Her movements were poetry written in steel and blood. The blade techniques are remarkably effective, Talak observed, watching the display with fascination. Energy weapons would be useless at such close range, but those metal implements cut whatever they touch, Sarah finished. That's the point. Elena's voice came through the radio from the southern perimeter. Incoming heavy units. The big beetles are back and they brought friends. The display showed massive creatures approaching the mining operation. These were larger than the first wave. Some the size of buildings, others moving like living tanks. Their armor gleamed with an oily sheen that suggested biological enhancement. Elena, can you stop them? Sarah asked. Already on it, Captain. Remember, we're sitting on 6 months of refined explosives. What followed was the most spectacular fireworks display in the planet's history. Elena had rigged the mining charges in a chain reaction that turned the southern approach into a field of craters. The massive Devourer creatures disappeared in fountains of earth and fire, but the victory came at a cost. The explosions had consumed most of their remaining mining charges, leaving them with limited explosives for the orbital mission. Captain, Davis called urgently, the weapon ship is accelerating. It'll be in position in 2 hours, not 6. Sarah felt ice in her stomach. They were running out of time. Elena, how many nuclear charges do we have left? 12 shaped charges, Elena replied, breathing hard from her run back to the command center. Enough to crack open an asteroid, but I don't know if it's enough for something that size. Talak was scanning the descending weapon ship with every sensor he had. The bioship's hull appears to be organic armor over a metallic core. Your explosives might penetrate, but what? The power source is enormous. If your attack fails to destroy it completely, the resulting explosion could sterilize half the planet. Sarah stared at the tactical display. The weapon ship was a dark shadow against the stars, growing larger every minute. Around the colony, Devourer forces were massing for what looked like a final assault. Captain, Rodriguez's voice came through the radio. We've got a problem. The creatures are showing new behavior patterns. What kind of behavior? They're retreating. All of them. Pulling back to minimum safe distance. Sarah understood immediately. The Devourers knew their weapon ship was about to fire. They were protecting themselves from their own attack. All personnel fall back to the command center, Sarah ordered. Abandon the perimeter. Everyone to the central compound. As her people retreated, Sarah made her decision. She turned to her officers, all of whom were watching her with expectant faces. I'm piloting the Prospector, she said simply. Captain, no, Rodriguez protested. The colony needs you. The colony needs someone to make sure those charges detonate, Sarah replied. I'm the ranking officer. It's my responsibility. Elena stepped forward. Sarah, let me go instead. I know those charges better than anyone. I can make sure they work. Sarah looked at her friend, this brilliant woman who could make mountains move with her explosives. Elena, I need you here. If this fails, you're the only one who might find another way. Captain, Talak interrupted. I volunteer to pilot the mission. Everyone stared at the mechanical alien. His lights were blinking in patterns that suggested deep emotion. Admiral, Sarah said gently, your people already consider you a traitor for staying with us. You don't need to die for humans. Captain Chen, Talak replied, his synthetic voice unusually soft. 6 months ago, I thought your species was primitive. I was wrong. You've shown me what true sophistication looks like. It's not about having the most advanced technology. It's about using whatever tools you have with maximum effectiveness. He gestured toward the display showing human defenders regrouping around the command center. Your people fight with weapons my ancestors abandoned centuries ago. But you fight with purpose, creativity, and courage that my species has forgotten. I want to learn what that feels like. Sarah felt tears in her eyes. Admiral, you already know what it feels like. You're standing here with us instead of evacuating with your people. That's what courage looks like. The weapon ship was growing visibly larger in the night sky. Soon it would be close enough to begin charging its devastating weapon. I'm going, Sarah said with finality. Elena, prep the charges. Rodriguez, get everyone to the emergency shelters. Tanaka, coordinate our remaining defenses. If this doesn't work, make the Devourers pay for every inch of ground. As her people moved to carry out orders, Sarah looked one last time at the colony they had built. Simple buildings, basic equipment, and people who had turned an empty world into a home. Captain, Talak called as she headed toward the door. Your species designation will be updated in Confederation records. From resource gatherers to strategic military allies, Sarah smiled grimly. Admiral, if we survive this, humanity is going to have a very serious conversation with your Confederation about what allies means. She walked toward the prospector, knowing she was walking toward her death. But she was also walking toward victory. Sometimes that was the same thing. Behind her, Elena was already arming the nuclear charges, muttering calculations under her breath. Rodriguez was herding colonists toward the reinforced shelters. Tanaka was checking her weapons one last time. Human beings doing what they did best, fighting impossible odds with simple tools and unbreakable will. The Devourers were about to learn why that combination had carried humanity to the stars. The prospector lifted off from Kepler 442b's surface like a metal comet climbing toward the stars. Captain Sarah Chen sat alone in the pilot's seat, watching the Devourer weapon ship grow larger through the cockpit window. In the cargo bay behind her, 12 nuclear charges waited to deliver humanity's final message. Captain, you're looking good on approach. Elena's voice crackled through the radio. Charges are armed and ready. All you need to do is get close enough. How close? Sarah asked, adjusting her trajectory toward the massive bioship. 50 meters should do it. The shaped charges will punch through anything at that range. Sarah looked at the tactical display. The weapon ship was easily a kilometer long, covered in organic armor that pulsed with its own light. Strange growths and protrusions covered its surface like tumors on a living thing. At its center, a massive cannon was beginning to glow with gathering energy. Time to firing? She asked. 3 minutes, reported Lieutenant Davis from the colony below. Maybe less. Sarah pushed the prospector's engines to maximum thrust. The mining ship wasn't built for speed, but it was built to last. Simple, reliable human engineering that would get her where she needed to go. The weapon ship's defenses activated as she approached. Energy beams lanced out from organic turrets trying to stop her approach. But the beams passed harmlessly around the prospector. Sarah realized with dark humor that the Devourers had the same problem as the Confederation. Their weapons were too sophisticated. They can't hit us, she reported back to the colony. Their targeting systems are designed for energy shields and quantum armor. They don't know how to track a simple metal ship. That's because you're flying a museum piece, Rodriguez's voice replied with grim humor. Good thing museums sometimes have their uses. Sarah was 500 meters from the weapon ship when everything changed. The massive cannon at its center reached full charge and began to turn toward the planet below. She could see energy building in its organic chambers, power that could sterilize continents. Elena, I need to detonate now, Sarah said into the radio. You're too far out. The charges won't penetrate at that range. Sarah looked at the weapon ship's cannon, then at her fuel gauges. She had enough power for one final burst of speed. Then I'll get closer. She pushed the engines past their safety limits. The prospector screamed toward the bioship's hull like a bullet fired from the planet's surface. Warning alarms filled the cockpit as the ship's systems began to overload. 200 meters. 150, now, Sarah shouted, triggering the detonation sequence. The nuclear charges exploded in perfect synchronization, shaped charges designed to focus their energy like spears of atomic fire. The prospector vaporized instantly, but not before its cargo delivered 12 simultaneous nuclear punches through the weapon ship's organic armor. From the colony's surface, the explosion looked like a new star being born. The weapon ship's hull split open like a rotten fruit, spilling energy and atmosphere into space. Its massive cannon, charged with enough power to destroy a planet, discharged chaotically as the ship's control systems failed. The energy beam meant for Kepler 442b instead lanced harmlessly into deep space, a column of destruction pointing at empty stars. Secondary explosions rippled through the dying bioship as its organic systems tried to cope with catastrophic damage. Atmosphere vented from 1,000 wounds. Lights that had pulsed with alien life flickered and went dark. The weapon ship broke apart and began falling toward the planet in burning pieces. Direct hit, Elena's voice shouted through the radio. The weapon ship is destroyed. Sarah, you did it! But there was no response from Captain Sarah Chen. She had given her life to save her colony, her people and her planet. In the colony's command center, Science Admiral T-Lock watched the tactical display with something approaching reverence. The 2 remaining Devourer bioships had stopped moving. For several minutes they hung motionless in orbit as if unable to process what had happened. Then slowly they began to withdraw. They're leaving, Lieutenant Davis reported with amazement. Both ships are heading out of the system. T-Lock's mechanical voice was quiet. They're afraid. For the first time in their existence, the Devourers have encountered prey that fought back effectively. They don't know how to process failure. Elena wiped tears from her eyes and activated the colony's communication system. All stations, this is Dr. Vasquez. The immediate threat is over. Begin damage assessment and casualty reports. The reports that came in over the next hour painted a picture of miraculous survival. Despite facing an enemy that had destroyed entire star systems, the human colony had lost only one person, their captain. How is this possible? T-Lock asked as he studied the casualty reports. The Devourers have never been defeated before. They've consumed hundreds of worlds. Rodriguez, now the senior ranking officer, looked up from a tactical assessment, because no one ever fought them the right way before. Everyone tried to match their technology with better technology. We fought them with old technology. Old technology that works, Elena added. Kinetic weapons, chemical explosives, steel blades. Things that don't care about adaptation or energy absorption. 3 days later, a Confederation fleet arrived in the system. Admiral Velthek, Commander Velketh's superior, brought 20 ships to investigate reports of a Devourer attack. What he found instead was a human mining colony, intact and operational, surrounded by the wreckage of 3 Devourer bioships. The alien admiral stood in the colony's command center, staring at footage of the battle with undisguised amazement. You fought them with kinetic weapons, he said slowly. Among other things, Rodriguez replied. And chemical explosives. Yes, sir. And blade weapons, Elena smiled. Tanaka cut down 17 flyers with nothing but a katana. Admiral Velthek looked at Science Admiral T-Lock, who had remained with the humans throughout the crisis. Your report claimed their weapons were archaic. I was wrong, T-Lock said simply. Profoundly wrong. Human weapons aren't archaic. They're timeless. Over the following months, everything changed. News of the human victory spread throughout the Confederation faster than light-speed communication. Species that had dismissed humanity as primitive now clamored for human military advisors. Confederation arsenals began producing kinetic weapons and chemical explosives for the first time in centuries. The phrase human simple entered galactic military terminology, meaning equipment that was reliable, effective, and impossible to counter through technological superiority. 6 months after the battle, Elena Vasquez stood in the Confederation Council chambers on Veltar Prime. She wore the insignia of Earth's first military ambassador, representing humanity's new role as a strategic ally rather than junior resource gatherers. Around her, representatives from dozens of species listened as she addressed the council. The Confederation spent centuries perfecting energy weapons, she said. You created plasma rifles, molecular disruptors, quantum manipulators, Magnificent achievements, but you forgot something important. She gestured to a display showing human weapons, simple firearms, basic explosives, steel blades that looked primitive compared to the sophisticated alien technology surrounding them. Sometimes the best solution is the simplest one. Sometimes the most advanced technique is the one that's been working for thousands of years. Admiral Velthek rose from his seat. Ambassador Vasquez, the Confederation owes humanity a debt that cannot be repaid. You've shown us that we became so focused on advancement that we forgot effectiveness. Elena smiled. Admiral, we didn't save the galaxy with superior technology. We saved it by remembering that the goal isn't to look sophisticated while fighting. The goal is to win. After the formal ceremony, Elena walked to the observation deck of the Confederation capital ship. Through the transparent aluminum windows, she could see Kepler 442b in the distance. The human colony had grown into a proper city, with new buildings and expanded mining operations. Commander Velketh joined her at the window. The alien who had once dismissed human weapons as primitive now wore a kinetic sidearm alongside his plasma rifle. I owe you an apology, Ambassador, he said quietly. For what? For calling your weapons archaic, for treating your people as inferior, for not understanding what we were seeing. Elena looked down at the simple steel knife on her belt, then at the sophisticated alien technology around them. Commander, our weapons aren't better than yours. They're just different. The trick is knowing when to use which tool. And humans know this instinctively? Elena smiled and thought of Captain Sarah Chen, who had flown a mining ship loaded with nuclear charges into the heart of an alien weapon. Of Rodriguez, who had trained colonists with rifles because he believed in being prepared. Of Tanaka, who had met flying monsters with nothing but sharpened steel. We learned it the hard way, she said. Through thousands of years of war, we discovered that the most important weapon isn't the gun or the bomb or the blade. It's the person holding it. Velketh nodded slowly. We called your weapons archaic, Ambassador Vasquez. We were wrong. Elena looked out at the stars where human ships now patrolled alongside Confederation fleets, carrying ancient weapons into the far future. They're not archaic, Commander. They're eternal. And now, thanks to what happened on Kepler 442b, the galaxy remembers why.